Civilization, like humanity, began in Africa. And it is in Egypt where we find evidence documenting this nation as one of the most significant civilizations in history. The country we now know as Egypt was founded in 3200 b.c.e. before the Common Era and was originally called Kemet. The people of Kemet were lovers of knowledge. They built numerous temples of learning along the Nile where they perfected the sciences of astronomy, mathematics, and architecture. Generations of social scientists developed systems of government, law, and religion which have influenced mankind for almost 6,000 years. These ancient people also studied the heavens, dividing the day into 24 hours and creating the earliest calendar of 365 and 1/4 days. The Step Pyramid was the first building ever constructed, and it still stands in the city of Saqqara. This 19-story skyscraper was built for King Zoser around 2600 BCE. It was designed by Imhotep, the world's first multi-genius. Less than 200 years later, Kemetic architects and engineers built 10 pyramids at the Giza Plateau. The most famous, the Great Pyramid, was built for King Khufu. The Great Pyramid of Khufu was comprised of nearly 4 million stone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. This incredible monument was originally built to a height of 481 feet, that's 48 stories. From the time of its completion in approximately 2500 BCE until 1884 ACE, when the Washington Monument was completed, Khufu's pyramid was the tallest man-made object on Earth. The base of the pyramid covers an area of 13 acres, that's 7 city blocks, and each side of the pyramid measures 755 feet, over 2 football fields in length. There is enough stone in the Great Pyramid to build 33 Empire State Buildings, and like the Empire State Building or any other skyscraper, the Great Pyramid was not built by slave labor. It was built by stonemasons who were masters of their craft. Every temple in Kemet was built by skilled craftsmen in accordance with precise architectural and engineering plans, and every temple was oriented to the sun or a specific celestial body. Ancient architects believed that a properly constructed and oriented temple would attract a specific nature or aspect of God whose spirit would dwell in the Holy of Holies inside the temple. Contrary to popular belief, the people of Kemet believed in one God. This supreme creator is often depicted as the sun and is the oldest symbol representing God, the creator of the universe. The sun was called by many names in Kemet. 3 specific names refer to the sun's changing attributes as it journeyed across the sky. When the sun rose in the east, it was known as Khepre. This Kemetic word meant rebirth. When the sun reached its zenith at noon, it was called Re, a name that described the creator on high. After the sun set in the west, it was called Amen, a Kemetic word meaning hidden or concealed. Many historians acknowledge Kemet as the source of the word Amen, the idea of a ray of sunlight, and concepts of rebirth and resurrection. The people of Kemet understood that the Creator manifests itself in everything: the air, water, earth, plants, and humans. Everything was thought to contain an aspect or principle of the Creator. Each individual aspect was called nature. Every nature was born as a set of twins, male and female Neteru. Each represented the complementary balance of a specific aspect of the Creator. They were, in effect, the many parts of the one supreme Creator. It is from the word nature that we have derived the word nature. The terms Mother Nature and Father Time are just modern names for ancient Neteru. The people of Kemet lived in harmony with nature. They oriented themselves to the seasons of the year, the rising and setting sun, moon, and stars, and the annual flooding of the Nile, which heralded the beginning of the new year. The people of Kemet built their homes and their temples of life on the east bank of the Nile, where Khepri was reborn every morning. At noon, they looked at Re on high, seeing within themselves the ability to also rise to great heights each and every day. They buried their dead and built their mortuary temples on the west bank of the Nile. This was to ensure that the souls of the departed would travel with Amen to the beautiful west every evening. Three of the most important Neteru were Asar, the first king of Kemet, Aset, his queen, and Heru, their son. The story of this African trinity was first recorded more than 6,000 years ago. It has been told and retold so many times that it is now difficult to distinguish myth from history. The story begins with Asar, the man who unified Upper and Lower Kemet and became the nation's first king. Asar introduced agriculture, writing, law, and government, and he was beloved by his subjects. Asar married a beautiful virgin named Aset, but before his honeymoon, Asar was assassinated by his jealous brother Set. Set not only murdered Asar, he also cut his body into 14 pieces and scattered them throughout the land. When Aset learned of the murder and dismemberment of her husband, she flooded the Nile with her tears and then sailed down the river in search of Asar's remains. Wherever Aset found a body part, she washed it carefully and anointed it with oils. Aset only found 13 parts of Asar's body. By assembling all of the parts and wrapping Asar's body in bandages, Aset created the first mummy in history. Naturally, Aset was overcome with grief as she prepared to bury her husband. She grieved because she and Asar had never consummated their marriage, and she would never bear children by the man she loved. Miraculously, before his body was laid to rest, the spirit of Asar visited Aset and impregnated her. 9 months later, Aset, the virgin, gave birth to a son, Heru, on December 25th. This event was recorded in the temples of Luxor and Philae. If this story sounds familiar, remember that it is more than 6,000 years old and has been retold many, many times. Throughout his youth, Heru was told of the great deeds of his father, and he prepared for the day he would avenge the murder of Asar and reclaim his father's kingdom. The battle between Heru and Set was the classic struggle between the forces of good and evil. Their struggle was depicted on the walls of the temple of Edfu. When Set was finally defeated, Heru was declared the legitimate ruler of Kemet. Heru was miraculously transformed into a falcon and flew into heaven to receive his father's blessings. Upon returning to Kemet, Heru reclaimed his father's throne. At the moment of Heru's coronation, Asar was resurrected and declared ruler of the afterlife when he ascended to the throne of judgment. Father and son were now co-regents. Heru ruled the physical world in Kemet, and Asar ruled the spiritual realm in heaven. As we've already noted, symbolism was very important in Kemet. Heru was sometimes depicted as a falcon. This image later became a national symbol. The right eye of Heru was associated with the sun because a falcon has keen vision, and like the sun, the symbol of the creator, it sees everything and everyone on the earth below. The resurrection of Asar was symbolized by a monolith called a tekken. So, wherever you see a tekken, remember that it is an African symbol representing the resurrection of Asar, an African king who died and was resurrected more than 6,000 years ago. It is equally important to remember that after Kemet was conquered, it was renamed Egypt by the Greeks. They also renamed Asar, Aset, and Heru. They called Asar Osiris, they called Aset Isis, and they called Heru Horus. Dozens of temples were built in Kemet, and each had a pair of tekkenu at the entrance, one standing to the left and one to the right. The tekken on the left represented yesterday. The one on the right symbolized tomorrow. The entrance to the temple represented today, the space which exists between yesterday and tomorrow. A pair of tekkenu also represented the complementary and dual aspects of life, a male and female nature. 4,000 years ago, there were more than 1,200 tekkenu in Kemet. Today, in Egypt, there are only 7. The tekken that once stood to the right of the entrance of Luxor Temple was removed in 1833. It now stands at the Place de la Concorde in Paris, France. There is a tekken in Central Park in New York City, one on the banks of the Thames River in London, England, and another in Istanbul, Turkey. There is a tekken in Vatican City in the center of St. Peter's Square. There are 13 tekkenu in Rome, many of which now stand in front of churches located throughout the city. In fact, the architectural design of the church steeple was inspired by the tekkenu which stood in front of the temples of Kemet. The story of Asar, Aset, and Heru is embedded within symbolism and architecture throughout Washington, D.C. The mall is laid out in the form of a cross. The Capitol is in the east. The Lincoln Memorial is in the west. The Jefferson Memorial is in the south. And the White House is in the north. In the center of the horizontal and vertical axis of this cross stands the Washington Monument, the ancient symbol representing the resurrected Asar. Not only is the Washington Monument an African symbol, but the idea of a reflection pool is also of African origin. Every temple in Kemet had tekkenu, and a sacred lake is seen here in the Temple of Karnak. Washington, D.C. is a city of monuments, and John Russell Pope designed many of them. In 1912, Pope submitted this design to the committee overseeing the creation of a memorial for Abraham Lincoln. It is a scale model of Khufu's Great Pyramid. The memorial committee rejected Pope's drawing because it was unoriginal, but they selected Henry Bacon's original design, which was actually a copy of the Parthenon, a Greek temple. The committee also selected Daniel French's original sculpture of Lincoln sitting in his temple. Further investigation reveals that French's statue of Lincoln was inspired by the statue of Ramesses II at the Temple of Abu Simbel in Egypt. Washington, D.C. is significant because it is the first planned capital built in modern times. It was designed by several of America's Masonic founding fathers, and they devised specific plans for their new capital long before the land was surveyed or the first spade of dirt was turned. Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution mandated that the new capital would be no larger than a 10-mile square. In 1791, George Washington, America's first Masonic president, announced that the capital would be built along the Potomac River on land ceded by Maryland on the east bank and Virginia on the west.